Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we tend to look at a lot of theories of everything, all-encompassing theories that could make a big difference in your own life if you understand them, and can improve your life. Uh, Things that are relatively obscure, and so you most likely wouldn't know anything about them if you didn't watch this channel. Today is video number 272 that we have done on the reciprocal system of theory. And the reciprocal system of theory was first promulgated by Dewey B. Larson, and the basic idea is that we live in a universe of motion. The universe is not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy. It is made out of motion. And for Larson, motion was the relationship between space and time. So really the universe is made out of space and time. And normally in legacy science, we consider space, especially space, but time too, as being like the container of the universe. This is the stage on which the universe goes through its paces. But in the reciprocal system, space and time are actually the contents of the universe, not the container. So that's a little bit of the paradigm shift there. But when Larson says motion is the relationship between space and time, he's really saying that there's a reciprocal relationship between space and time. Motion is a fraction where time or space is the numerator and space or time is the denominator. And if you multiply one, it's the same as dividing the other. Just like the most basic kind of motion that we know of is speed. The bicycle is going 20 miles per hour. It's 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. If you decide to cut the speed in half, you can say now that the bicycle is now only going 10 miles per hour. You divide the space by 2, from 20 to 10. Or you can multiply the time by 2 and get the same result. So instead of saying the bicycle is now going only 10 miles an hour, you could also say the bicycle is now only going 20 miles per 2 hours. So that shows a reciprocal relationship between space and time. But all of our basic scientific quantities are relationships between space and time, with 3 caveats that Larson discusses in his first fundamental postulate. He has 2 fundamental postulates. The first one is by far the most significant, and that one basically says that time and space have their coordinate aspects, meaning that they come in 3, or I would say 3 or 4 dimensions. And like coordinate space, XYZ coordinates. But we're familiar with the concept of coordinate space, but there is also coordinate time, 3 or more dimensions of time. And then there's also what Larson calls clock space and clock time. Clock time we're familiar with. This is a scalar motion, a motion that has a magnitude but has no specific direction. Like time. Time is always getting later and later and later and later, but it is not doing so in any specific direction. And so too with space. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart, but in no specific direction, which you would envision using a balloon with dots on it. If you blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other. Suck in the balloon, all the dots are moving toward each other. These are outward and inward scalar motions. And also the Hubble telescope actually observed this, the progression of space or the flow of space or clock space, in that all the Hubble telescope observed that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other, just like on the surface of a balloon, or really the surface and interior of a balloon, possibly more like a loaf of raisin bread, where you put the bread in the oven and it begins to rise. All of the raisins are moving away from each other. Okay, then the third caveat in that first postulate is that time and space are only in discrete units. There is a minimum unit of time and a minimum unit of space, below which you do not have time or space. You have to have at least one unit to have anything. If you don't have a full unit, then you have zero. And this is also how Larson identifies the boundary of this universe, or what he calls unit speed. If you have exactly 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have what Larson calls unit speed, which is the speed of light. The speed of light is 1/1 equals 1. So he calls that unit speed, and this is the boundary between two separate sectors of the universe. What Larson calls the cosmic sector, where everything is moving faster than the speed of light, and what Larson calls the material sector, where everything is moving slower than the speed of light. And when you cross that speed of light boundary, you move into a different region where the rules themselves are different. So in the material sector, you have coordinate space and clock time, 3-dimensional space, and the clock is always moving forward. But when you cross that boundary and you move into the cosmic sector, then you have coordinate time and clock space. That also shows the reciprocal relationship between space and time. Okay, now that's just a brief introduction about the reciprocal system. Now, Larson used that first fundamental postulate along with the second one, which basically says that the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute and its geometry is Euclidean. That has been contested by many of his followers, including Dr. Bruce Perret, who we're going to be reading from here today again. But he took those two fundamental postulates and he derived an entire theoretical universe from them. That's when he started writing books. He wrote books on chemistry and physics and atomic physics and astronomy and even economics and metaphysics. Then he eventually died in 1990. And since then, there have been a few other people who have taken up the mantle, including Dr. Perret, who unfortunately also died back in 2020. But before he did, he wrote a lot of books and a lot of articles, and he came up with what he calls RS2, the reevaluation of the reciprocal system, where he tweaked a few of Larson's concepts, and he also extended Larson's applications into other fields. Now today we're reading one of his articles that is called Time and Timelines. When Perret wrote his articles that were somewhat speculative, He wrote under the pen name of Daniel Phoenix III, the Daniel Papers. And so this is one of the Daniel Papers called Time and Timelines. And the first heading here is called The Nature of Time. One of the least understood concepts known to man is that of time. A great deal of headway regarding the nature of time was made by engineer Dewey B. Larson, published in his 1959 book, The Structure of the Physical Universe. Larson asserts that both space and time are simply the aspects of a reciprocal ratio he refers to as motion. They have no other meaning and cannot exist independently outside of this relation. He often drew an analogy to a box, with the outside being space, the inside being time, and the box itself being motion. If you have an inside and outside, then you have a box. If you have a box, then you have an inside and an outside. If you have an outside, then you have an inside, then an outside. So it is with space, outside, and time, inside, and motion, the box. The three concepts are always connected and cannot operate independently. Larson's theory eventually became known as the reciprocal system of physical theory. In the re-evaluation of the reciprocal system, RS2, it is pointed out that the concept of space-time is analogous to the Eastern concepts of yin-yang, where space is the yang aspect and time is the yin. As discussed in Tajitu symbolism, yin-yang cannot be separated, just as Larson's ratio of space to time cannot be separated. Larson then took it one step further, observing that all the characteristics of space must also have a similar character in time. In space, we see a three-dimensional coordinate spatial grid with clock time. There, from the reciprocal perspective, there must also exist a realm that contains three-dimensional coordinate time with clock space. He refers to the former as the material sector and the latter as the cosmic sector, identified in conventional physics as the universe of antimatter. The material sector is our common reference frame that contains the observable and measurable structures of the universe. The cosmic sector, however, remains unobservable and unmeasurable to our physical senses, though we can see its effects on how time changes space. Those effects being called force fields, electric and magnetic fields. We cannot see a magnetic line of force until it interacts with a material object such as iron filings and alters their behavior in space. So what we have in the reciprocal system model of the universe is two different sectors of existence. The 3D spatial material sector of our common experience, and a 3D temporal cosmic sector that we cannot directly perceive, but is still there, influencing space. With a proper understanding of time, the concept of timelines can be understood as a path through a three-dimensional temporal landscape, where the ideas of past, present, and future are just abstractions of that path in a temporal landscape. What is behind you is the past, where you are standing is the present, and what is in front of you is the future. Just looking at some of the footnotes here to see if they're necessary to look at them. Okay, this next section is called Phoenix 3, an investigation into the nature of time. These were a series of emails sent to David Wilcock over the last year, being 2012, discussing a number of topics regarding time and the timelines. Now, many of you might be familiar with David Wilcock. Mr. Wilcock, when I first encountered his work about 20 years ago, he was, you know, just piecing it together. He had a lot of different chapters of things that were written, but didn't really know how they fit together. But now he's regarded as a pretty important author and commentator in the truther movement and so on. He learned, I would say he learned most of what he knows from Bruce Perret. Wilcock lived with Perret for a while, and Perret tried to teach him the reciprocal system. He never really got it. He got aspects of it, and so when he writes, he's still a little bit disjointed. I think he has his heart in the right place, but he doesn't understand the reciprocal system that well. He's trying to put it together with a lot of ancient ideas and New Age ideas. But anyway, this is coming from Project Camelot video. I thought that was Carrie Cassidy, but this one is David Wilcock interviews Bill Wood. And I think just Perret is going to be commenting on this video here. As documented in the video, Bill Wood, live question and answer, Wood apparently came in on the tail end of everything, and I can clarify a few of the things discussed. As Wood mentions, the New World Order, do not understand time, specifically the distinction between clock time and coordinate time. Three-dimensional time, like its spatial equivalent, has coordinates. In coordinate time, you have clock space, our concept of distance. Wilcock mentions this about 45 minutes in when talking about moving into coordinate time, walking a distance and translating back to coordinate space to appear in a different clock time. This is essentially correct, and it gives some insight into what the clock actually is. It is a scaling factor that our consciousness uses to scale coordinate time to appear as a temporal distance or duration. It is a similar mechanism to space, where doubling the distance to an object looks the same as halving its size, or cutting its size in half. Translation versus scaling. The New World Order folks don't understand this and try to apply 1D temporal vectors in a 3D temporal system. That resulted in the necessity for a device referred to as a temporal vector generator, or TVG. About 58 minutes in, Wilcock states the purpose of the TVG, the temporal vector generator, was to align the timelines. Not exactly, though it can affect them. The TVG was a device to navigate 3D time, just like you would target an object in space with a gun, except they target a temporal coordinate. Once you have the coordinates of where you are and where you want to go, you can plot a course from one time to the other. The tunnel. The TVG itself is not much more than a surveyor's instrument for the temporal landscape. If you were to target a spatial location with a gun and shoot something, the spatial landscape is altered. So it is with sending something to a targeted coordinate in 3D time. It is what you send that alters the timeline, not the orientation of vectors. Again, as a spatial analogy, it is easy to blow up a building in the distance, but pretty hard to shoot an undue bomb to put it back the way it was. Same thing in the temporal landscape. If you blow something up there, you cannot put it back to the way it was because past and future are abstractions, not actualities. You are stuck with the alteration. Structures in the temporal landscape are unaffected by what we consider clock time. There, it is clock space that acts in a manner analogous to the conventional clock. Once they start messing around in the coordinate time landscape, they cannot undo what they did and have to try to keep manipulating nearby regions to alter the flow to where they want things to go. It starts this oscillation, bouncing from one side to the other, as Wood described. They are always overcompensating and have just about lost control and literally destroyed the future, the distant past, the distant part of the temporal landscape they were targeting, not causality. Sorry about that there. They are always overcompensating and have just about lost control, literally destroyed the future, the distant part of the temporal landscape they were targeting, not causality. As mentioned, one must have the coordinates of where you are before you can plot a course to another temporal location. Okay, now he's got some footnotes here. One is, I introduced David Wilcock to Larson's theories, including coordinate time, back in 2005. So he does have a fundamental understanding of the reciprocal system. Okay. As discussed with Wilcock years ago, this was the ZTR, the zero time reference. This reference was established for the Phoenix 3 project during the Philadelphia experiment, when they sent a ship back to 1943. The ZTR for the artificial realities is centered on 1943, and they have about a 50-year range of fire, so to speak. In time, you don't fire spatial structures, you fire waves, because the coordinate time realm is etheric. Time appears solid because it is the reciprocal of the spatial material sector, which is empty. Coordinate space is empty, with locations filled by time. Coordinate time is full, with locations emptied by space. So their guns are like a couple of people playing a flute to a remote observer. Even though they may both play the note C, the frequencies will not be exactly the same. So the further you go, the more the waves go out of phase. Far enough, they may even cancel each other out from that phase difference. This is where the concept of range comes from. The computer equipment they use to generate these waves is through digital to analog conversion. Even with very high resolution, it is still a digital reconstruction. There are errors that get worse the further in time it goes. Okay, we're going to stop right there. and start up tomorrow with the section called Through the Looking Glass. And I thank you for tuning in today, and hope you have a great night.